Everyone in the city knew the name Damien Wolfe, but most of them thought the name no longer meant anything. 3 years ago, Damien had been the kind of man people talked about with wide eyes. He had built his business from the ground up, starting with nothing more than a small factory in his hometown that nobody wanted. The machines were old, the roof leaked, the workers had not been paid in 2 months. Damien borrowed money from a bank that almost laughed at him, fixed the machines himself, worked 16 hours a day, and within 2 years, turned that broken factory into one of the most productive manufacturing plants in the region. From there, he never stopped. He opened more businesses. He expanded into shipping and trade. He hired hundreds of people, many of them from the same poor neighborhoods where he had grown up. The men and women who worked for him did not call him by his first name. They called him the King, not as a joke, as a sign of deep respect. Then, in a single week, nearly everything he had built was taken from him. 3 people he had trusted completely, Victor Crane, his financial officer, Marcus Hale, who ran his operations, and Sonia Vance, his legal advisor, had been quietly working against him for over a year. They had planned carefully. They had used the legal system, fake documents, and hidden agreements to strip Damien of 40% of his company holdings in one swift move. By the time Damien found out, the paperwork was already signed and filed. The city watched. Some people felt sorry for him. Others were not surprised. A few even smiled. And Damien? He did something that nobody expected. He did nothing. He went quiet. He stopped showing up to industry events with the same confident energy people remembered. He wore simpler clothes. He arrived late to meetings. He let contracts walk out the door without a fight. He smiled at people who were rude to him. He sat in boardrooms and nodded slowly, while younger men who had once looked up to him now spoke over him. People began to whisper, "He is finished," Victor told his new partners over dinner one evening. He poured wine into his glass and leaned back in his chair, with the satisfied look of a man who believed the story was already over. He lost his fire. He does not have what it takes anymore, Marcus agreed. He had always been the quieter one of the 3, the one who thought more than he spoke, but even he had stopped worrying about Damien. He had 3 years to fight back, he said one morning. He never did. That tells you everything. Sonia was the only one who still felt uneasy. She was the smartest of the 3, and smart people always know when something does not add up. She would sometimes pause in the middle of a meeting and think about Damien, the way he used to sit very still before making a big decision, the way his eyes never fully relaxed, even when he was laughing. She told herself she was being paranoid. She told herself that the Damien Wolfe she remembered was gone. She was wrong. What nobody knew was what Damien did after midnight. Every night, when the city was quiet, Damien sat alone in a room on the top floor of his house. It was a simple room, a desk, a chair, several computer screens, and a wall covered in notes and printed documents. He called it his thinking room. In this room, he was not the tired, quiet man the world had been watching. In this room, he was working harder than he had ever worked in his life. For 3 years, he had been building something new, something invisible. He had quietly opened holding companies under different names. He had moved money through channels that no one knew to look for. He had rebuilt his shipping network through a subsidiary that had no visible connection to his name. He had hired a team of lawyers, not the flashy kind who make noise in newspapers, but the quiet, serious kind who work for years before anyone hears from them. He had also been collecting evidence, every fraudulent document, every fake filing, every illegal wire transfer that Victor, Marcus, and Sonia had made during and after their betrayal. Damien had a forensic financial analyst named Dr. Nadia Chen working for him. She was a small, precise woman who had once worked for federal regulators and could read financial documents the way most people read simple text. Over 18 months, she found things that the 3 betrayers had believed were buried forever. Damien did not rush. He understood something that his enemies did not. Patience is not weakness. Patience is the weapon of someone who has already decided they are going to win, and is simply choosing the right moment. That moment came because of a community center. On the edge of Damien's hometown neighborhood stood a large, warm building called the Wolfe Community Center. Damien had built it 6 years earlier to honor his father, a steel worker who had died young and never seen his son become successful. The center employed 200 people from the neighborhood. It offered job training, after-school programs, and health checkups for families who could not afford better. To Damien, it was not a business. It was a promise he had made to his father and to the people who had believed in him when he was nobody. Victor, Marcus, and Sonia chose this building as their next target. The plan was Sonia's idea. She had found, through careful legal searching, that the land the center sat on could be acquired through a shell company. Once acquired, the center could be closed, the building torn down, and the land sold to a luxury property developer. The profit would be significant. And more than the money, it would send a message. There was nothing left of Damien Wolfe that they could not touch. They filed the acquisition paperwork on a Thursday morning. By Thursday evening, Damien had read every page. He sat in his thinking room for a long time that night. Not with anger, not with panic. With the calm, clear focus of a man who had been waiting for exactly this moment, and now knew that the waiting was over. He picked up his phone and made 3 calls. Short calls, just a few words each. By the time he went to sleep, the first moves had already been made. What followed over the next 6 weeks was something that people in the business world would talk about for years. The first sign that something was wrong came for Victor Crane on a Friday morning. He woke up to messages from his financial team telling him that his company's stock had dropped sharply overnight. Nobody could explain why. By noon, it had dropped further. By end of day, Victor's flagship company had lost nearly a third of its public value. Investors were pulling out. Calls were going unanswered. Victor spent the weekend making phone calls and getting no clear answers. He did not yet connect it to Damien. On Monday, Damien's legal team filed a civil complaint in 4 different jurisdictions at the same time. The complaint was 400 pages long. It named Victor Crane, Marcus Hale, and Sonia Vance. It outlined, in careful and documented detail, 3 years of financial fraud, false legal filings, and violations of the original partnership agreement. Every claim was supported by evidence. Every figure had a document behind it. The legal world noticed immediately. The business press noticed within hours. By Tuesday morning, it was in the newspapers. Victor read the filing at his office and felt, for the first time in 3 years, genuinely afraid. Not because of what it said, but because of how complete it was. Someone had been watching everything, documenting everything, building this case for a very long time. And he had seen none of it coming. Marcus Hale's situation moved faster. Within 2 weeks of the filing, 3 of his largest clients, companies whose leadership had maintained quiet contact with Damien throughout the years, terminated their contracts with Marcus on the same day. They signed immediately with Damien's newly announced subsidiary. Marcus's logistics network, which had seemed so strong, suddenly had nothing to move. He was left with infrastructure and no business to fill it. He tried to reach Damien directly. He sent a message asking to meet. The reply came from a junior assistant. Mr. Wolfe's schedule does not have availability at this time. Sonia Vance fought the hardest. She had spent her entire career in legal rooms and knew how to delay, deflect, and complicate proceedings. She hired a team of expensive lawyers and prepared to fight the complaint line by line. She believed she could manage it. Then Dr. Nadia Chen's findings became part of the public record. What the forensic analyst had uncovered went beyond the original fraud. Sonia had, at one critical point in the scheme, filed false certifications with a professional regulatory body, certifications that stated certain documents were accurate when they were not. This was not a civil matter. This crossed into criminal territory. A federal referral was made. Sonia's law license was suspended pending investigation within 30 days. She made one final attempt to reach Damien. She asked, through an intermediary, whether there was anything she could offer in exchange for a softening of the complaint against her. Damien's legal team replied with a single sentence: "Mr. Wolfe has nothing he needs from you." 6 weeks after the initial filing, Victor Crane held an industry conference that he had been planning for months. It was meant to be a celebration, a gathering of business leaders where Victor would speak about the future of his company and the direction of the industry. He had invited 300 people. He had prepared a long speech. He had ordered flowers for the tables and wine for the reception. Nobody had told him that Damien Wolfe was going to walk through the door. Damien arrived alone, without announcement, wearing a dark suit that fit him the way it always had, like it was made for someone who understood that appearance is a form of communication. He walked calmly through the crowd. People turned to look. A few reached out to shake his hand. He shook each one and kept moving. He walked to the front of the room. The moderator, confused, stepped aside. Damien took the microphone. He spoke for 11 minutes. He did not shout. He did not perform. He spoke the way a man speaks when he knows exactly what he wants to say and has no fear of how it will land. He said that 3 years ago, 3 people he had trusted had taken something from him. He said their names clearly, without bitterness. He said that losing what he lost had hurt him deeply. He did not pretend otherwise. But he said that the loss had also taught him something he could not have learned any other way. That the people who stay when things get hard are more valuable than any building or contract or number on a financial report. He then said that the Wolfe Group, his company, his real company, was larger today than it had been on the day before the betrayal. He did not wave papers or show slides. He simply said the number, clearly, so that every person in the room could hear it. The room was very quiet. Victor stood up from his seat near the front. He started to say something, a response, a challenge, something to regain control of the room. His voice came out louder than he intended. Damien turned and looked at him. He waited until Victor had finished. Then he said, quietly but clearly enough for everyone to hear, "I am not speaking to you, Victor. I am speaking to everyone in this room who is watching you right now." Nobody laughed, nobody made a sound. Then, from somewhere near the back, one person began to clap, slowly. Then another. Then the sound spread through the room like something that had been held back for a long time, and finally had permission to come out. Victor sat down. He did not speak again for the rest of the evening. In the months that followed, each of the 3 betrayers faced what they had built for themselves. Victor settled the civil case for a sum that cost him 2 of the 3 companies he had taken from Damien. He kept his name but lost the substance behind it. He still lives in the same city. He passes Damien's offices on his way to work. Marcus filed for financial protection. His logistics empire, which had seemed so solid, collapsed completely without the client base that had quietly been waiting to leave him. He wrote Damien a long letter of apology many months later. It was sincere. Damien read it once, folded it carefully, and put it in a drawer. He never replied. Sonia faced a federal investigation that lasted over a year. Her case became the kind that law professors use to teach students about the limits of cleverness without integrity. She never practiced law again. The Wolfe Community Center not only survived, it grew. Damien funded a new wing and hired 50 additional staff members from the neighborhood. At the opening ceremony for the expansion, he gave a short speech. He said only one thing that people remembered afterward. "They thought this building was my weakness. It was my reason." He did not explain further. He did not need to. People who had watched Damien during those 3 quiet years sometimes asked him, afterward, how he had managed to stay calm, how he had smiled when people insulted him, how he had sat still while others moved against him, how he had not reacted when every instinct must have told him to fight. He always gave the same answer. He said that reacting is what people do when they are afraid. And he had not been afraid. He had been building. "There is a difference," he said, "between a man who is quiet because he has nothing to say and a man who is quiet because he is not ready to speak yet." He had simply been waiting until he had everything he needed to say everything at once. The last image the story leaves is a quiet one. Late on a Tuesday night, long after the legal battles were settled and the newspapers had moved on to other stories, Damien sat alone in his thinking room. The screens were all lit. The numbers on them were different from the numbers 3 years ago, larger, stronger, built on a foundation that nobody had been able to see while he was laying it. He sat there for a long time, looking at what 3 years of silence had made. Then, one by one, he turned off each screen until the room was completely dark. He was not a man who needed to see the scoreboard to know the result. He already knew.